Have you ever tried to just, sit down? Like maybe it's a quiet Sunday afternoon and you're finally trying to relax. But almost immediately you feel this wave of guilt or anxiety or just pure restlessness wash over you. You're sitting there and suddenly your brain is screaming that you need to be doing something useful because otherwise you're just wasting time. People probably look at you and praise you, right? They're like, wow, you're so independent. You're so mature. You've really got it all together. But there's a hidden weight to all that maturity. Today, we're going to explore a deeply fascinating, honestly profound psychological reality. Welcome to this explainer on the survival independence trap.
So why exactly does doing nothing feel so incredibly dangerous? If you relate to that intense discomfort when you try to rest, I really want you to hear this right now. You aren't just a workaholic. This isn't just some weird quirk of your personality. Psychology actually tells us that some children don't lose their childhood suddenly. They just kind of outgrow it, quietly. One day, you simply realize someone had to be responsible and, well, it might as well be you. What you're experiencing today is the quiet reality of a child who had to grow up way, way too fast.
Let's really dive into this. Throughout this explainer, we're going to decode this psychological trap that's keeping your mind endlessly restless. It's a concept known as survival independence. We're going to break down exactly why you feel the way you do, where it actually comes from, and most importantly, how you can finally begin to put down this massive weight you've been carrying around for so long.
Let's start with Section 1, the root, the parentification trap.
To truly understand why you can't just relax, we've got to look at the psychological origins of this inability to simply be. Now, parentification happens when a child is expected to manage adult emotions, whether it's their own or someone else's, long before they're actually emotionally ready to handle that kind of burden. To survive in that kind of unpredictable or demanding early environment, your brain did something absolutely remarkable, but it came with a huge cost. It adapted. You learned to solve problems. You learned to stay incredibly calm in the middle of chaos. You basically became the mature one. But in doing so, you completely suppressed your own needs. You learned this quiet, devastating lesson that your feelings, well, they always come last.
You weren't born strong. You became strong because there was simply no other option. I really want you to let that sink in for a second. Your strength, it wasn't just a personality trait you picked out. It was an absolute survival necessity.
Moving on to Section 2, the effect, split maturity and survival independence.
You see, that intense early environment didn't just magically fade away into the past. It shaped exactly how you operate today. Because you couldn't rely on a consistent foundation of support growing up, you were basically forced to stop asking for help. You stopped expecting comfort. You just handled things entirely alone, even when you were literally just a kid who shouldn't have had to. Psychologists call this adaptation survival independence. It completely reframes what looks like a superpower into what it really is, a survival mechanism. To the outside world, you look incredibly capable. You're the person everyone goes to when things fall apart, right? But this extreme form of self-reliance isn't born out of confidence. It was born out of an early inability to depend on anyone else to catch you when you fall. And this brings us to a deeply hidden internal conflict known as split maturity. Basically, this is an internal state where certain parts of yourself, like your logic, your problem-solving skills, your sense of responsibility, they're highly developed. But underneath all that armor, your core emotional needs remain entirely unmet.
So you end up living with this constant duality. On one side, you're exceptionally wise and responsible, but internally, you feel emotionally unfulfilled and honestly pretty confused. Because you never actually got the time to learn how to safely need other people, the very idea of receiving care today feels totally foreign. It feels deeply, deeply uncomfortable to let someone else take the wheel, even for just a moment.
That leads us to Section 3, the reality, uneasy rest. Which brings us right back to that quiet Sunday afternoon we talked about at the very beginning. The reality of living with survival independence is what we call uneasy rest. When you were young, a calm environment usually didn't mean peace. It usually meant the storm was gathering, and something was about to go horribly wrong later. Notice how your body physically remembers that past today. First off, you've got this chronic, high-alert nervous system. Your body is perpetually waiting for the other shoe to drop. Second, you subconsciously associate rest with neglect or even danger. And third, you really only feel safe when you're actively needed, when you're out there proving your worth through action. Because of this chronic stress adaptation, your nervous system essentially got permanently stuck on high alert.
And on top of all this restless energy, you've likely developed something called guarded empathy. You probably have a razor-sharp radar for sensing tiny shifts in other people's moods. You anticipate their problems before they even open their mouths. You know exactly how to care for them, but
you keep a very strict emotional wall up. Why? Well, because you know exactly the immense cost of caring for others without aggressively protecting yourself.
Let's look at Section 4, the reset, putting down the weight.
Because of all this heavy early responsibility, you probably carry around a really false belief. This idea that if you are being taken care of, you're somehow being a burden to someone else. You end up minimizing your own needs. You probably even apologize just for wanting a little bit of support. But it is time for a reset. It's time to start putting down that weight. I really want you to believe this. Psychology does not call you broken. You are not defective just because you can't relax. Your nervous system simply did its job. It adapted to intense pressure early on just to keep you safe. You had to learn responsibility way before you ever got to experience safety. You had to learn strength before you were ever allowed to experience softness.
In the past, the rule was strength before softness. But in the present, the goal is granting yourself the permission to rest. Healing doesn't mean you're becoming weak. It definitely doesn't mean losing your edge or your capability. It simply means shifting your mindset to understand that the emergency, it's over. You are finally allowed to rest. You're allowed to let your guard down.
You survived the storm. You built a shelter. But are you ready to actually live? If you grew up responsible for more than a child ever should, and you're finally ready to master your mindset, to truly understand your psychology, and to unlock your potential, make sure to subscribe to Learn with Canvas. We're building a community completely dedicated to growth, healing, and uncovering the hard truths behind our success. Thank you so much for taking this time to understand yourself a little better today.